The late afternoon was ending, and the sun was setting with a dramatic, burning intensity. Its light poured like liquid gold through the tall, unyielding windows of the Aperture Dance Studio. This light, now low and horizontal, cast elongated, precise golden rectangles across the polished maple floor. The air was alive. Tiny dust motes swirled in the vibrant light beams, catching the sun and illuminating themselves. They looked like minute, suspended dancers, ephemeral, completely weightless, and gloriously free. In stark, agonizing contrast, Emily Chin stood frozen in the absolute center of the vast, echoing room. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Her expression was a mask of blank, protective exhaustion. Her body was caught mid-phrase, halted in a beautiful, complex solo sequence that had once felt utterly electric and alive. Now, in the face of her mother's scrutiny, it felt utterly hollow. The voice came again, cutting through the heavy silence from the studio's far corner. It was a voice that was calm, completely controlled, and edged with the cold, unyielding precision of steel. Again, Emily exhaled sharply through her nose, a small, soundless puff of frustration. She didn't bother to turn her head. She didn't need to. She knew that tone better than she knew her own name. It was the specific, terrifying voice her mother, Clare, used when raw disappointment had solidified into unshakable, definite resolve. Clare stood rigidly, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her posture was one of unyielding perfection. Her eyes, narrowed slightly behind her thin-framed glasses, were fixed entirely on her daughter. At $48, Claire still possessed the unteachable dancer's poise permanently etched into her spine, the kind of grace that cannot be unlearned. Only worn differently with the brutal passage of time, once a celebrated principal dancer with the renowned West Coast Contemporary Ensemble, Claire now ran Aperture Studio. Her reputation was granite. She turned raw, promising talent into disciplined, world-class professionals. And right now, her only daughter, Emily, was not merely testing that reputation. She was shattering her mother's long-strained patience. "Emily," Claire said, her voice sharper now, cutting like a staccato note. "From the spiral drop, count 5. And mean it." The instruction was simple, but the emphasis on "mean it" was a profound judgment. Emily tugged aggressively at her oversized hoodie, a loose, protective garment that was several shades too large. She tossed it toward the studio bench with slightly too much force, the sound of the fabric hitting the wood a small, useless act of defiance. "I was meaning it," she muttered, the words barely audible. She rolled her shoulders in a desperate, futile attempt to physically shake off the crushing weight of her mother's expectation. But her feet felt heavy and sluggish as she grudgingly reset her stance. The music began, a haunting, complex piano piece layered with sharp electronic pulses. She launched herself back into the demanding sequence, a deep, controlled lunge, a planned, dramatic fall to the floor, a liquid roll, and then an explosive, whip-fast rise into a critical series of quick turns. She missed the third turn. Her footing slipped, she stumbled, and she grabbed desperately onto the horizontal bar with a frustrated, guttural grunt. Claire cut the music immediately. She jabbed her finger down hard on the speaker system. The immediate silence that descended was heavy, thick, settling over the room like a fresh layer of dust. Jasmine, Emily's best friend and fellow dancer since their freshman year at the conservatory, paused her quiet stretches by the mirrored wall. Her eyes were wide, reflecting a quiet, knowing concern. She understood the specific tension well, the constant, painful push and pull between Emily's innate, wild, creative spirit and Claire's absolute, unyielding, relentless standards. "You're thinking about your phone," Claire stated flatly, stepping forward, the distance between them shrinking to a battlefield. "Or your boyfriend, or what you're having for dinner. You're not here. Not in this room. Not in this body. Emily spun around, the heat of defensive anger rushing violently into her cheeks. I am here, Mom. I have been here for 3 solid hours. Maybe if you didn't treat every single rehearsal like a military drill. This isn't boot camp, Claire interrupted, her voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp cut. This is your future. The National Contemporary Dance Fellowship auditions are in 10 days. They do not care how chill you are. They care if you can execute with unshakable precision under overwhelming pressure. And right now, Emily, you demonstrably can't. The words stung with a terrible, undeniable pain because they were absolutely true. Emily was profoundly distracted. She had stayed up late into the pre-dawn hours, scrolling obsessively through Instagram, comparing her own quiet private progress to the flashy, highly edited reels of dancers in New York and Berlin girls with major agents, international gigs, and flawless, effortless technique. She had skipped morning class not once, but twice this week, weakly convincing herself that she desperately needed the rest, when the genuine truth was she was terrified of the mirror. And beneath all the layers of distraction and defiance was annoying, cold fear. What if she wasn't actually good enough? What if her mother's fierce, decades-long belief in her was nothing more than blind maternal bias disguised as infallible prophecy? Not everything has to be perfect. Emily shot back, her voice climbing to a desperate peak. Maybe I don't want it to dance like some programmed robot you designed. Claire's face immediately tightened. For a brief, agonizing moment, Emily thought she saw something fragile flicker across her mother's eyes. Was it hurt? Was it genuine regret? But whatever it was, it instantly vanished, replaced by her usual, impenetrable mask of control. Fine, Claire said, her voice now dangerously quiet, completely drained of heat. If you cannot take this singular opportunity seriously, then you should simply walk out. Because I refuse to waste one more second of studio time on someone who consistently treats their profound gift like a simple, expendable hobby. Emily's chest burned with a mixture of righteous indignation and self-pity. She grabbed her water bottle with a violent movement and stomped toward the heavy studio door, her heels slapping the polished floor like a metronome gone rogue, but her hand froze on the cold, brass knob dot outside. The great, indifferent city hummed, the relentless sound of cars, the distant wail of sirens, the noise of life moving forward without any consideration for her private breakdown. Inside, her entire future waited, coiled and silent in the vast echoing space. She slowly turned back. Claire hadn't moved an inch. Her eyes were fixed downward on the glossy maple floor, as if she were bracing for a physical impact. Or perhaps simply utterly exhausted from the perpetual task of bracing it all. Emily swallowed the thick knot of emotion in her throat. I'm not walking out, she said quietly, the defiance gone, replaced by a strained sincerity. But I need you to actually see me. Not the perfect, flawless dancer you desperately wish I was. Claire looked up, startled, as if hearing her daughter's genuine voice for the first time in many months. Then her phone chose that exact fragile moment to ring a sharp, jarring trill that shattered the delicate atmosphere. She answered tersely, speaking low and fast about a suddenly canceled evening class, and then abruptly stepped into the hallway, leaving Emily completely alone in the echoing golden studio. Alone with her stark, truthful reflection. Emily slowly walked to the large, mirrored wall and stared critically at herself. She saw the familiar, messy, tousled bun, the smudged, slightly raccoon-like eyeliner. Her lips were pressed into a thin, tight line of profound anxiety. She remembered being a small 8-year-old girl, dancing with wild, uninhibited abandon in their tiny living room while her mother played Chopin on an old, slightly out-of-tune keyboard. They would both laugh, bright, genuine laughter. When Emily tripped over her own small feet, Then they would immediately try the sequence again, barefoot on the worn carpet. When had that genuine joy ceased? When had every necessary correction subtly transformed into a painful personal judgment? When had the sound of a mother's love begun to sound exactly like a chorus of perpetual criticism? Jasmine approached quietly, holding out a folded, clean towel. "She's hard on you because she can see what you are truly capable of," Jasmine whispered gently, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hush. "But maybe just tell her you're genuinely scared." Emily blinked, the suggestion a sudden, disorienting revelation. "What if I'm not as good as she thinks I am?" "Then be as good as you think you can be," Jasmine replied, squeezing her friend's shoulder with fierce loyalty. "That is truly all anyone can ever ask." Even her. Asterisk, the heavy door opened again. Claire re-entered, moving noticeably slower this time. She did not approach the sound system. Instead, she walked directly to the center of the polished floor and, in a gesture that was utterly unprecedented, she sat down cross-legged on the cold wood. Emily realized she had never once seen her mother do this in the formal studio space in 20 years. "I lost my spot in the Paris company when I was $22, Claire said. Her voice softer, lower, and more vulnerable than Emily had heard it in years. "It wasn't because I lacked skill. It wasn't because I wasn't clean enough." She paused, looking directly at the dust motes still swirling in the golden light. "It was because I played it absolutely safe. I gave them clean lines. I gave them perfect timing. And I gave them no soul. The director told me, word for word, 'You dance like you're afraid to be seen.'" Emily slowly sat down across from her, pulling her knees up to her chest. Her arms instinctively wrapped around them like a protective armor. "I don't want that agonizing regret for you," Claire continued, her gaze now steady, fixed only on Emily. "I push you with this relentless intensity because I know precisely what it costs a dancer to look back over their shoulder and wonder, what if I'd risked more? I don't want you to carry that devastating weight." Emily's throat tightened, a powerful knot of empathy and sorrow. Hot, immediate tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back with fierce resolve. "Not here. Not yet. I'm scared I'll disappoint you," she whispered. The confession of painful truth finally released into the space. Claire reached out, her hand hesitating for a fraction of a second, and then finally placed her palm squarely over Emily's. Her palm was rough, calloused from years of gripping bars, of marking endless choreography in thick notebooks, and of clapping rhythm for beginner toddlers. "You could never disappoint me by trying your absolute hardest," Claire stated, her voice ironclad with conviction. "But giving up, that hurts. Because I know precisely what you're made of." The tears finally spilled over then, just one clean, hot line tracing a path down Emily's cheek. She did not lift her hand to wipe it away. Asterisk, Claire stood up, a powerful, graceful movement, and offered her hand, palm up. Emily took it, rising. The simple physical gesture felt like a bridge being slowly and deliberately rebuilt across a terrifying chasm. "Not for me," Claire said, her eyes challenging Emily one last time. "For you." She walked to the speaker and pressed play. This time, Emily didn't allow herself to think about the counts, the specific corrections, or the expectations. She thought only of the small girl who danced purely for joy. She thought about the complex, flawed, fierce woman she desperately wanted to become, a woman who was fully, bravely present. She let the music saturate her, not as a difficult task to be mastered, but as a magnificent story to be profoundly told. She dropped into the spiral with an aggressive, joyful abandon. She rolled like water, finding its path and its destination. She rose like flame, catching air and ascending. Her turns were still sharp, but they were now absolutely fluid. Her arms carved the space around her with deep, Meaningful intention dot in the mirrored reflection, she saw not just technical movement, but deep meaning. She saw not fragile perfection, but undeniable truth. When the final, sustained note of the piano faded into the massive silence, she stood breathless. Sweat glistened on her temples. Her chest was rising and falling in rhythmic, visible waves, like ocean waves after a storm. Clare did not clap. She didn't need to. She simply nodded once, a slow, deep, profound movement. And in that singular gesture was contained everything: pride, relief, love, and perhaps even a silent, necessary apology. She walked over and handed Emily a water bottle. "Tomorrow, we refine the transitions into the floor sequence," she said, her voice now back to the professional coach. "And work on your breath control in the suspension hold." Emily took a long, deep drink, then smiled. The smile was small, but it was absolutely real. "Yes, coach." For the first time in many months, Claire laughed. It was a quiet sound, warm and completely unfamiliar, like the sound of sunlight finally breaking through heavy clouds after a long, difficult storm. As Jasmine quietly slipped out. Sensing the moment of closure, Emily stayed in the vast studio, replaying the entire phrase on her own. Her muscles ached with pleasant fatigue, but her mind was completely clear. The fear was still there, she realized, but now it had powerful company: purpose, clarity, and the quiet, solid certainty that she was no longer alone in this massive journey. Outside, the first city lights began to blink on one by one, painting the windows with new colors. Inside, a dancer had found her true rhythm again. Not because she was broken or punished, but because she was finally seen. Because someone loved her enough to demand her absolute best, and loved her enough to patiently wait while she struggled and eventually found it.